The training hall of the Interspecies Defense Academy smelled like ozone and discipline. It was the oldest facility on Station Meridian, a vast, vaulted chamber carved from the station's original hull plating. Its walls embedded with impact sensors, its floor etched with the scorch marks of 10,000 training sessions conducted by 10,000 species over 60 years of the Accord's existence. The Academy accepted candidates from every member civilization. It trained them equally, it tested them equally, and it graduated them, in theory, equally. In theory, Instructor Veth had been running the Academy's combat integration course for 11 years. He was Drellian, 8 feet tall, triple-jointed limbs, a sensory cluster instead of eyes that could track 17 objects simultaneously, and a professional philosophy that could be summarized, briefly, as smaller species should know their place. He never said this out loud. He didn't have to. It showed up in how he structured the sparring rotations, in which candidates he pushed into advanced tracks, and which he quietly shuffled toward administrative electives. In the way he looked at the human candidates, always with that slight, unhurried tilt of his sensory cluster, the Drellian equivalent of a patient, superior smile. There were 4 humans in the current intake. Ben was one of them. Lily was another. Ben had arrived at the Academy 6 weeks ago with a duffel bag, a letter of commendation from Earth's diplomatic corps, and a reputation that had preceded him by approximately 3 days. Someone at intake processing had pulled his athletic records and circulated them, which meant most of the station already knew he had spent 8 years competing in professional contact sports before pivoting to interspecies relations. He was broad, quiet, and had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough real situations that artificial ones didn't rattle him. Lily had arrived the same day, with a smaller bag, no circulated records, and no reputation at all. This would turn out to be a significant miscalculation on the part of everyone who had noticed Ben and filed Lily away as an afterthought. The incident began, as most significant incidents at the Academy did, during a free sparring session. Instructor Veth liked free sparring because it gave him plausible distance. He could arrange the pairings, watch the outcomes, and then write the assessments. And if the Drellian candidates consistently outperformed the smaller species, well, the data spoke for itself. Today's rotation had placed Lily against Cadrex, a Drellian second-year cadet who outweighed her by approximately 300 pounds and had 4 inches of natural armor plating along his forearms. Cadrex was not a bad cadet. He was not, in the way that Hai had been a bully, personally cruel. He was simply a product of Instructor Veth's quiet system, one that had taught him, over 2 years, that the smaller candidates were a formality. You went through the motions. You didn't get hurt. They didn't particularly matter. He entered the sparring circle with the loose, easy confidence of someone who wasn't planning to try very hard. Lily entered behind him and stood at her mark. Ben was watching from the observation bench, arms crossed, expression neutral. He had seen Lily train every day for 6 weeks. He knew what was about to happen. He also knew, with the certainty of someone who had been underestimated many times himself, that saying so in advance would rob her of something important. So he watched. Instructor Veth signaled the start. Cadrex moved first, a standard Drellian opening, a wide lateral sweep designed to use his reach advantage and establish physical dominance in the first 3 seconds. It was textbook. It was also exactly what any cadet who had studied Drellian combat patterns for 6 weeks would expect. Lily wasn't where the sweep expected her to be. She had moved before it arrived, not back, not sideways, but through, ducking under the arc of Cadrex's arm and coming up inside his reach, where his armor plating didn't cover and his size became a disadvantage rather than an asset. What followed was not a single dramatic moment, but a rapid, efficient sequence, a joint lock, a redirect of momentum, and then Cadrex was on the floor with Lily's knee on his back and his arm at an angle that made it structurally unwise to attempt standing. The hall went quiet. Cadrex tapped the floor. Lily released him and stepped back. Cadrex got up slowly, recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the session. He looked at Lily with the wide, reconfigured expression of someone updating a large number of assumptions simultaneously. Lily looked at Instructor Veth. Veth's sensory cluster had gone very still, which, in Drellians, indicated suppressed surprise. He held it for only a moment before his professional composure reasserted itself. He made a notation on his assessment pad. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth and controlled. Adequate technique, he said. However, the approach was irregular. In a real engagement, an opponent of Kadrex's mass would have recovered from the initial redirect. You relied on an opening that a more experienced opponent wouldn't have given you. Lily said nothing. She returned to her mark. Ben, on the observation bench, said nothing either. But his jaw had tightened slightly. Because what Veth had just said was not wrong, exactly. But it wasn't right, either. It was the specific kind of technically defensible criticism that is designed not to evaluate performance, but to diminish it. Ben had been on the receiving end of that kind before, from coaches who had looked at him and decided on their assessment before the session began. He knew what it sounded like. He also knew that Lily knew. She was too experienced, too precise, not to recognize it. What he didn't anticipate was what happened next. Veth moved on to the next pairing. He was halfway through his instructional preamble, something about reach differentials and center of gravity principles, when he stepped back to gesture at the sparring floor, and his shoulder collided with Lily, who was crossing behind him to retrieve her water canteen. The collision was minor, a glancing impact. In the ordinary course of a training session, it would have merited a brief acknowledgement and nothing more. What stopped Instructor Veth was not the collision. It was the look. Lily turned, slowly, in the particular way of someone who has been dismissed once and technically correctly criticized once and has now been physically jostled without acknowledgement, and who has decided, with the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who knows exactly how much they are worth, that she is finished pretending not to notice. She looked at Veth. It was not an angry look. Anger would have been easier to manage. You could categorize anger, dismiss it, write it up as emotional instability. This was not anger. It was something considerably more unsettling. It was clarity. The expression of someone who sees a situation with complete precision and is communicating, without words, that they see it, that they have seen it from the beginning, and that they are prepared to be very, very patient about it. Ben had seen that look exactly once before, from Lily, during a navigation exercise 3 weeks ago when a Pelion cadet had taken credit for her route calculation. She had looked at him the way you look at a problem you have already solved and are simply waiting for the solution to become apparent to everyone else. Instructor Veth was an experienced officer. He had the sensory apparatus of a species that evolved reading environmental threat signals. He had spent 11 years commanding a room full of candidates trained for dangerous assignments. He recognized what he was looking at. The silence stretched for 4 full seconds. Then, quietly, in a register that only the 3 nearest people heard, Instructor Veth said, "Sorry." It came out before he had decided to say it. This was evident from the way his sensory cluster shifted immediately afterward, as though surprised by his own output. Lily held his gaze for one additional moment. Then she retrieved her canteen and returned to the bench. The session continued. Veth's instruction was, for the remainder of the hour, scrupulously fair. That evening, Ben and Lily sat in the Academy's common room with 2 mugs of the beverage the station's dispensary insisted on calling coffee. "You know," Ben said, "you could have just said something." "I did say something," Lily said. "You didn't say any words." "Words are loud," Lily said. "They give people things to argue with." She drank her coffee. "That look, though, there's nothing to argue with. It just sits there, and the person has to decide what to do with it." Ben considered this. What if he hadn't apologized? Lily looked out the viewport at the dark geometry of stars beyond the station hall. There was a long pause. "I would have waited," she said simply. Ben nodded slowly. Outside, the station turned through space with the measured patience of something built to last. And somewhere inside it, 11 years of quietly tilted assessments and technically defensible dismissals were being, by one small and unhurried degree, recalibrated. Not because anyone had shouted, not because anyone had demanded, because a human girl had looked at someone and, without saying a word, made it completely clear that she knew exactly what was happening and was not afraid of it. That, it turned out, was plenty.